So what I'd like to do is to open it up, and I'll let Chris moderate. But if you've got just want something that resonated, if you want to say something that was interesting that the person you were talking to lifted up, that'd be cool. Or if you have a question.
And I think we have another microphone handing around. So yeah, there's a hand over on that side. And if you could just introduce yourself to name and organization.
Great. Hi, I'm Nancy Olson. I'm the CEO of the Greater Eureka Chamber of Commerce and the Redwood Coast Chamber Foundation, which is a new nonprofit designed to support equitable economic development. We're really excited about the possibilities. I talked to Nicole from Lake County. She's with the Lake County EDC. And one of the things that we talked about was the lack of business in the room. We've got a lot of theorists. We have a lot of people who are working on it, but we don't have business in the room. We have a handful of chambers of commerce, which is great, which is kind of like that next level, and we're bringing the business voice, but the lack of business is in the room. And what is the role of chambers of commerce in helping to do this work?
Wow, what a great question. And I think we'll address that now and then maybe take a couple more questions. We've actually done some work with the Association of Chamber of Commerce Executives, which is the national association. This is now like 7 or 8 years ago now, or 10. We're really interested in understanding and helping to make the argument about why an investment in equity, particularly in the form of diversity and inclusion, is critical for the future of chambers of commerce. And part of that is particularly for a lot of small cities and regions around the country, like the most vibrant sector of small business is businesses owned by people of color and women, and many immigrant businesses too. And part of them seeing the future of the role of commerce is to really better represent that growing body of businesses and leaders, but then also trying to be a stronger voice in the community for equity and inclusion. It is harder businesses into these kind of conversations. I mean, I think it's not just this room, there are many other. Part of, I think, what we're increasingly seeing is many businesses that also recognize the importance of equity. And Manuel has this great story that he tells that's very closely tied with his position at USC that I'll let you tell.
Great. So I'll tell that story in a minute, but one thing I want to lift up from what you're saying is also the role of young business people, because they have a social mission. They're starting businesses, but they've been shaken by these times as well. And they're trying to think about how things can be more equitable, how things can be more inclusive, how businesses and communities can be LGBTQ friendly and tap into every talent that's available. Those young business people are also facing the sandwich generation issues of childcare and elder care. So for the chambers that might be in the room, how do we really develop that young business voice? It's hard for them to think, because sometimes they think chambers are going to be older, stodgy, civic thing that they will kind of graduate into when they're no longer dynamic. Instead, how do we get them in? I mean, you know what I'm talking about, to be real. And how do we get them in at the beginning with things that are fun, that are engaging, that bring data and presentations? When we've done those presentations, it's young business people who are really trying to figure this out. The story that Chris lifted up, it's a fun story. I have a endowed chair at the University of Southern California, which I didn't realize this, but they actually literally give you a chair. So I have like a chair in my office that's pretty nice. But it actually came with a bunch of money too. So we run a postdoc program, pays part of my salary. We do an event each year. And the guy who gave the money for the chair is actually a sort of center-right Republican who just loves me. I try to be charming. But I think for another reason too, he's of immigrant stock and there's that bonding. But also, at one point, I asked him, how'd you become so rich? Like, what was the secret? And he said, well, I treated my customers right, I treated my workers right, I treated my suppliers right, and the business was successful. And I think what's interesting is that the economics we teach people is about being cutthroat and about, uh, paying your suppliers as little as possible, really going after your workers. And if that was the case, then Haiti would be the richest country on earth, right? What is the case is that successful businesses know in their bones what this guy knows. If you treat your customers right, your workers right, and your suppliers right, in the long run, you will do better. And I think, how do we get people back to that economic common sense is really crucial. So,
And I want to share one other story from the Central Coast in Monterey County. There's an employer there, a company called Joby Aviation. They're developing a kind of next generation electric aircraft. It's kind of cool, kind of scary. But they're manufacturing prototypes and expanding in, sorry. Don't cover that thing, thank you. You forget in the pandemic speaking. Anyway, so they're expanding their manufacturing facilities and need, workforce in. And, what they say is it's operating machinery. It's complex, like carbon composite materials and, electric batteries, but they can provide people the technical skills for a, living wage job in this facility. They put out a call for, job opportunities, internship opportunities, got nothing. And they were like, what's going on? People don't want these jobs. But then we were able to build a partnership with Mujeres en Acción, community organizing network. Actually has a lot of similar traditions to the True North organizing network, and it's a PICO IAF affiliated faith-based organizing network who could recognize what I was talking about earlier, those youth in the region that had the drive, the motivation, the desire for that kind of work. But don't read the job notices from Joby and don't have a resume, right? And so we're intimidated even if they saw the application. So you actually needed that translation to be able to recognize those skills and assets experience. And now Joby's a convert, right? They're totally committed. They've just agreed to expand in Marina. They're also expanding in Ohio, but that is a direct result of that engagement. So I think the lesson in that is you may not get many employers into this kind of collaborative visioning process, but there are ones out there that when it's directly linked with those skills, the workforce assets, the issues in the region, that there are other ways of engaging them, as I'm sure you know. Other questions?
Doctors Brenner and Pastor, always great to see you. I always learn something new every time I hear your presentation. I just want to say thank you to the organizers of the event for a tremendous turnout and for having me as one of your guests here from the Fresno County area. I'm Ismael Ish Herrera. I'm with California Forward. I actually bring the international lens to the conversation. We didn't even get to all three prompts. I was so invested in the first response. I had a chance to meet and talk to Nicola, and she brought an interesting perspective of having spent most of her life in Canada and being here in the Redwood Coast for the last 2 years, and how she often finds herself, I don't want to speak for you, actually, maybe you want to offer that. Okay. She finds herself sometimes frustrated because back in Canada, she experienced more support from the federal and provincial governments, which would be the state government here, for funding initiatives and programs that are aligned with more aligned with the values of residents in localities. And she told me all about the great work that's being done in Arcata around, the alignment between public investments and the sort of quality of life that people expect and demand of their local governments and service providers. despite not having the level of funding from state and local governments in this country. And so we got into a whole discussion about just, how that felt. And it was interesting to get a perspective from someone who grew up in a country where the value sets and the way that the systems are structured are a little bit different from what she's learning, like the rest of us here in the United States. But I would have loved for you to add anything I may have missed.
No, that's very articulate. Thank you. Yeah, I would say as a Canadian, I love socialism, and Canada is not quite at that point, but it is closer than here. But I'm very struck always in my community about how incredible people are at organizing and working at a grassroots level, because I think we're kind of spoiled in Canada and oftentimes don't feel the need to do that because we haven't been pushed maybe to that point. So it's inspiring, but it's also very complicated.
Great, thank you for those comments.
So I just want to say to Ish that you just modeled something very important, which is you listened very carefully and learned from what someone else shared with you and brought that forward into the room. And I think that these experiences are like that. I mean, those of us who are academics, I know too often we have, oh, I've got this in my head. I'm going to make sure I say it, right? Even I'll just find a moment, right? So this act of listening is going to be so crucial to devising a surf that actually works. And I'm looking at our colleagues from CCRP who are, I know, going through a lot of listening, right? Also, probably sometimes when you didn't really want to listen, it's a little bit like when your kids tell you something and you're like, yeah, you're right, but I did not want to hear that. So anyway, listening is very important.
Oh, we got in the back there.
Hi, is this working? Okay. Hi, my name is Eva Shepard-Nickel, and I am the Governor's Office of Business Cal OSBA Accelerate iHub for 20 counties in the North State. So I cover this area as well, relatively new. I am based out of Chico, and I'm also the director for the Center of Entrepreneurship at CSU Chico. So I care deeply about industry, and I second what the lady from Eureka was saying about not enough industry in a room. And in a lovely conversation I had with Madeline Klein, that was the first thing she noticed. When I would say one of the things that struck me as also missing was representation from other minorities, so Native, Black, etc. in the room. So that was the first thing that I noticed. And that's not a question, it was just something I noticed.
Great, thank you. There was another hand here. We'll probably be able to take this one more, and I think I'm looking for signs, but we'll probably have to wrap up at that point.
I promise to be brief. Apparently, a number of people here know me. I was particularly struck by one of the slides that showed the age cohort by ethnicity in the region, and it actually makes me very hopeful in a way. I don't know if you can tell, I'm an older white guy, and one of the issue, and I'm on the SURF HRTC, so I'm thinking now about, we're talking a lot about through this SURF process, the infrastructure projects, and you mentioned the social infrastructure, and I'm struck by a program that Nancy and Susan and others, including me, worked on last year, which was the Leadership Redwood Coast, and we really need to figure out how to get that cohort plugged into this leadership programs. And this was a great program that not only taught skills, but took them throughout the region to learn the on-the-ground issues, and they met people. And, you know, growing up, I was told, you're a leader, be a leader, and I jumped right into that and have been doing that for 30 years. And so I think that part is so important. We talk so much about the physical infrastructure, and we're going to create these opportunities and all that, but the opportunity comes from participating in the leadership of these initiatives. And so I was just really struck by that. It was actually great. I said, oh good, fewer old guys like me ultimately, and coming into this other realm, and how do we bring those folks and teach them what we were taught. Not only that we were taught, we were expected to do, right? It's like, of course, you're a natural. You're going to be expected to do that. So, so Nancy, I'm like, oh man, I'm newly inspired. HRTC, I'm newly inspired. Let's see if there's regional things we can do through the SURF process that develops that social and leadership infrastructure. And that really includes, even to some extent, changing how governments listen to people, because there's nothing worse than a public hearing. And there's nothing more exclusive than a public hearing, you know, especially when it's occurring during the day for county supervisors and those sort of things, when people who work can't attend. So anyway.
Yeah, thanks for those comments. And I'll just say a couple closing words inspire that, and then turn it to Manuel, and I think we'll have to wrap up. But one of the hats that I wear at UC Santa Cruz is the director of something called the Everett Program for Technology and Social Change, which is kind of an academic name. But it was started 28 years ago by student activists who were frustrated by the academic knowledge they were getting about the critiques of problems in the world, and wanted to both have hands-on experience and connected to solution builders and providers in the world. So it started with protests, but then has evolved now into a full minor, 4 courses that are open to students all across campus, which helps prepare leaders to work with community organizations around social justice goods and using technology to help support that work. And they have built a program in which my job as director of the program is subject to their approval. Like, they're my boss, literally. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Because what it forces me to do is to listen in a way that they have real structural power over my position as director of the program, and they have resources that they allocate. And I say that because it made me think about, you know, we're asking the wrong question if we're asking, why are people who are not in the room not in the room? But to say, okay, who's not in the room? How do we go to where they are and understand what they're doing and what their interests are, and how do we figure out, how do we learn from that to help guide our work? And I think about that particularly with the youth, right? Because there are young leaders out in our elementary schools and high schools, in our communities all across this region, I'm sure. And part of what we need to do, and I say this for we in the Central Coast as well, is understand what they're doing, what their aspirations are, and how can that be harnessed to help build the future that we need.
So first, I want to thank you all for having us here. We always enjoy being together. And also, I realize as someone from Los Angeles, I sometimes look at myself in the mirror and I go, yeah, I am an LA stereotype. You know, I'm dressed in black. You know, what is all this about? So thanks for being generous. You're probably snickering in the background, but thanks for being generous and welcoming us here. I want to get at something about your question by hearkening back to a book before Solidarity Economics. We had done research looking at just growth and equity growth and community, looking at the issues of the relationship between equity and economic prosperity. We found out that regions that were more equal, that were less residentially segregated by race, that were less politically fragmented, were actually able to sustain employment growth over time. And after doing that study, which was a sophisticated statistical study, we decided to do something economists don't usually do, which is talk to people. So we, over the course of 2 books, went to about 22 different metropolitan regions in the United States that seemed to be doing a better job at putting together equity and growth. Some that were doing badly, so we could figure out about it. And we tried to make sure that they were a mix of blue regions politically and red regions, because there are some that have been doing pretty well in their way. And what we found was interesting. We came up with a term, diverse and dynamic epistemic communities. Now, why such a complicated multisyllabic term? I mean, it's an academic publication. We wanted to make it sound complex. But epistemic community is what you know and who you know it with. Diverse is the group at the table diverse, and dynamic is can they deal with a shock? That's all about leadership and investing in bringing leaders together over and over and over again so that they're rooted in the same knowledge around their regional economy, that they're rooted in the relationships with one another, so they're able to have fights, but not have them be fights to the death, have them be struggles around policy, knowing that they will eventually come back together. So I just think the investment in leadership and the investment in coming back over and over again to the same table with relationships is actually more important than we all let on. So keep talking, keep fighting, do some action. Thank you.